Ladies and gentlemen, clear your calendars because the Quakes just dropped the 2026 regular season schedule, giving you just about all the plans you need for the coming year. Welcome back to another Quakesaholics video. My name is Kevin, and today we've got quite a lot to talk about and quite a few things to be thankful for ahead of this Thanksgiving. And if anyone knows of any good Cyber Monday deals on flights and hotels, let me know because it's going to be a busy 2026. But along with the 2026 schedule, we've also got some club and league news to cover, so let's kick off the roundup. First and most importantly, the 2026 schedule. This 34-game season will feel pretty familiar running from February 21st through November 7th, with the Quakes taking on every team in the Western Conference twice, once at home and once on the road, with the remaining 6 games being split between 3 home games and 3 away games against 6 different Eastern Conference teams. This is the same format as last year, and when it comes to the Eastern Conference games, it'll be against Atlanta United, Orlando City, and Nashville at home, and Philadelphia Union, Toronto FC, and FC Cincinnati away. At first glance, this selection does look a little bit more challenging than the 2025 ones. Without knowing what our team will look like in 2026, it feels like the only quote-unquote easy game is against Atlanta, who just barely escaped last place this year. The road games in particular against Philadelphia and Cincinnati will be undoubtedly tough, but who knows? It feels the Quakes played better on the road in 2025, so maybe they'll pleasantly surprise us again this year. In terms of what might feel unfamiliar when it comes to the schedule is how there will be 7 Wednesday night games, which feels like a lot more than usual. And another difference is in how the schedule will stretch into the first week of November, where it usually ends in mid to late October before the playoffs. The reason for this is because the league will be put on pause throughout the entire duration of the World Cup, which makes sense. There's no word on Leagues Cup scheduling as far as I know, but unfortunately that probably isn't relevant to Quakes fans for 2026. Unless you're like me and you enjoy a good old LAFC hate watch. When it comes to highlighting the most important matchups, naturally the Quakesaholic answer is all 34, but the dates to really circle are the home opener on February 21st against Sporting Kansas City, the away game at LAFC on April 19th, the Stanford Cali Clasico against the Carson Galaxy on July 25th. Note that this is pretty distant from 4th of July weekend like it usually is because of that World Cup break. And then we have the away game, Cali Clasico at Carson on August 19th, and then a month later on September 19th against LAFC, once again surrendering home field advantage in favor of Levi Stadium. And finally, Decision Day, closing out the season on the road against Minnesota United on November 7th. And sure, if you're also keeping tabs on the San Diego games, those will be April 4th at home and September 9th on the road. And while we're highlighting these California matchups, I do want to complain a little bit about how all 3 of our away games against California teams are not scheduled on a Saturday. 2 are on a Wednesday and 1 is on a Sunday. That won't stop us from going. I think I'd rather miss a best friend's wedding, but it is frustrating because it makes it a lot less accessible for other people to travel for, and few things come close to the feeling of being at one of these kinds of games. On the bright side, I am incredibly superstitious when it comes to the Quakes, and having beaten the Galaxy on a Wednesday night multiple times now, I do look forward to this one. Aside from that, everything else is pretty typical. I'll roll the whole season at this point, but in terms of trends, it feels like a pretty balanced schedule. There aren't too many back-to-back away games. I think there's only 3 of those. There's a bit of a punishing one towards the end of September. It goes Houston, Austin, and San Diego, but thanks to the World Cup shifting games around, we do get to avoid playing on the road in Texas during those worst summer months. Another interesting back-to-back away game is Colorado and then RSL on the following Wednesday. I'd assume the team might just fly directly into Salt Lake City just to shape some travel time. Might make for a good away trip if you're trying to double up. And then, yeah, we'll see how the Open Cup games fit into the schedule, but at first glance, it feels like the games are spread somewhat evenly despite the long season break for the World Cup. Overall, I'm excited, and February feels like it just can't come quick enough. Let me know what you think about these games and which ones are most interesting to you. Moving on to club news, we've got 3 this week. The first one is that Oscar Verhoeven has been signed permanently to San Diego FC, and the Quakes will be receiving $350,000 in GAM for this move. This comes after being sent out on loan pretty early on in the 2025 season, and honestly, this is being taken as pretty negative news by most Quakes fans, and I have to agree. It's frustrating to see homegrown players that show lots of potential be sold not only for so little, but so quickly. Oscar Verhoeven was a promising player who just couldn't find his place in this team under Bruce Arena. I remember last year he was playing as a fullback, and Bruce Arena was talking about trying to get him in the midfield, and I don't know if it was more of Oscar wanted to go to try to experiment with San Diego or if it was just the team decision. But while it is frustrating and a bit annoying that he went to a California rival team, I think I am happy for him. He became a regular starter before getting injured, and San Diego is a team that will let him flourish the way that he honestly just deserves to. And at least at the time of this recording, he's only a couple matches away from possibly lifting an MLS Cup, which again makes me happy for him, but it's incredibly frustrating as just a Quakes fan. The next piece of news is another departure, but I think this one is a little bit more positive. At least I think most people will agree. Bruno Wilson has gone ahead and made a goodbye post ahead of the Quakes' official end-of-season roster updates, so it seems that his time here is just about coming to an end. Since it's coming from the player directly, I am treating this as a legit source, and I do think this is a step further from the rumors we've heard about Josef Martinez and Christian Espinosa. I was able to find this club roster profile directly from MLS, and it shows that Wilson did have a club option for 2026, so it seems the Quakes have declined that extra year for his contract. And I do think that this makes sense. Bruno Wilson has been an inconsistent player throughout his, 2 years with the Quakes, mainly due to injuries, but also the form hasn't been consistent either. And I don't think he's shown anything to make us believe that he's better than any of the other center backs we have on the roster. He's gotten us a handful of goals, I gotta give him the credit there, but he's also been the culprit of conceding many, many more. The price tag associated with him is the biggest negative, and I think it makes sense for the Quakes to move on and find a better way to spend that salary money. Thank you for your time here, but this had to be done for the best interest of the Quakes. The last piece of club news is that the Quakes have mutually decided to part ways with General Manager Chris Leitch. I've been sitting on this for a few days now, and I'm going to be honest, I still can't form an opinion on whether this is a good or bad piece of news. To start, there just isn't that much transparency on what Leitch's impact was on the team and club, and there isn't really much in terms of defining his responsibilities, so to try to judge his performance is honestly just clickbait at best or rage bait at worst. Chris Leitch deserves recognition for his contributions to the club on and off the pitch. He's been here for years, 58 games played, served as head coach for a bit in 2017, and he's been the GM for the Quakes since 2021, along with a bunch of other roles at the club since retiring as a player. But I do understand the frustration that fans might have with some of the roster decisions that have been made over the years under his position as general manager. If you've been around the club for a couple of years, you might hear people referring to players as, quote, Leitch signings, quote, Bruce's guys, quote, Almeida's guys, and so on. As an example, Ian Harkes, Dave Romney, and Kay this year could be called, quote, Bruce's guys because they're players that have played under Bruce Arena at previous clubs, so the assumption is that they've been brought to San Jose through his request. And unfortunately, if you remember the constant bottle jobs of Andy Rios and Daniel Vega, you'll remember that those are, quote, Almeida's guys because he coached them too and also brought a lot of players from Argentina in his first year as head coach for the Quakes. But then there are signings that just feel like they were selected by Leitch. These are players like Ebobisi, maybe Hernan Lopez, Carlos Ocapo perhaps, possibly Danielle. It's not to say that these are players that Chris Leitch scouted, but the gist is that the final say probably fell to him as the GM, and these weren't players that a coach might have had in mind originally. Again, there's no transparency on this, but if you've been a long-time Quakes fans, you sort of build an intuition over the years for who might be making certain roster decisions. And I think some of the players that are attributed to Chris Leitch might not have had the best story here in San Jose. Players like Hernan, Pellegrino, Ebobisi, and some of the draft players too, as we presume that the GM has a big say in who gets selected there. And when we see the mismanagement of situations like Verhoeven's departure, Pellegrino's departure, followed by his now 6 goals and 6 assists in his past 5 games for San Diego, the recent rumor about Christian Espinosa leaving the team as a free agent, Hernan's failure to become the leader of this team and not even a regular starter, all these things add up to a lot of money and resources that feel like they just didn't pan out or could have ended better. And when you think about the appointment of Luchi Gonzalez as head coach and how that unfolded, combined with the fact that we've seen 2 interim coaches under Chris Leitch, all these things just add up to a pretty negative image for most fans that desire more from this club. Let's be real, the results on field just haven't been enough. We haven't even won a single playoff game in all this time, and altogether we've seen something like over $10 million be spent in transfers during this time. But I'm not convinced that this decision to part ways was purely because of poor sporting results or decisions made by Chris Leitch. Because in his defense, Chris Leitch did make some really good moves in his time here. Again, he isn't the sole decision maker, but in this time we saw the sale of Cade Cowell and Emi Ochoa, which combined were an estimated $5 to $6-ish million, and they were the first examples of the academy actually being able to produce outgoing players. I'd have to double check, but I believe Marcos Lopez was also transferred to Europe during Chris Leitch's time here, and some of the draft picks have really been spot on. Daniel Mooney is the best example of that from this past season. And to add on to this, it's worth highlighting that Leitch made moves after 2024 to really give Bruce Arena as much flexibility as possible when it comes to roster construction. I mean, finding a way to transfer Carlos Gresso, who was eating up over $1 million in salary space, out of the team made it possible to bring in a player like Chicho Arango as a free agent as a designated player. I think a bigger reason for this decision is because of Bruce Arena's role as both a head coach and a sporting director. This move is probably to allow Bruce Arena to have more freedom over the construction of his project here in San Jose. This, in a way, does give us transparency into who is making decisions now. It's not to say that Bruce Arena is making all the decisions and has complete control over roster construction, but at this point, I think it's pretty fair to believe that he is making the final say. which is something no coach for this team has been able to say, as far as I know, at least not in recent history. So I think whether this news is positive or negative comes down to how you trust Bruce Arena. The argument in favor of this is that so far Bruce Arena's player selections have been remarkably positive. Of the players that came into this team last year, you can only point out maybe one or two as having underperformed, but those were players that didn't represent much of the transfer budget. I mean, one of them was a free agent, and I mean, you combine those two salaries and it isn't really that much of the salary budget either. The big names have all proved their worth so far and have been one of the biggest contributors to this team. I mean, DeJuan Jones, his impact was instant. Chicho Arango, Joseph Martinez, Ian Harkes, and Dave Romney became very regular starters and some of the best contributors for this team. I mean, more so Harkes in that example. But the argument against this is that in terms of longevity, coaches historically haven't lasted that long in San Jose. Giving the coach so much power can really backfire if they lock in their roster to a particular identity, style, and profile, but then the results don't follow. Along with this is the number of player relationships that have seemingly soured with Bruce Arena. I'm talking players like Rodriguez, Daniel, Hernan Lopez. So it's easy to let go of an underperforming coach, but then much harder to find a replacement if the roster feels inflexible. But one thing's for sure, whether the club succeeds or fails in the coming year, we'll now have one sole architect, Bruce Arena. Something great power, something great responsibility, right? We'll see what happens. Lastly, on the news roundup, the league has decided to shift the MLS calendar starting in 2027. Right now, as we just discussed, the season runs from February through November plus playoffs. Starting in 2027, MLS will transition to align with the European football calendar, meaning the season will start in July/August, then pause in about mid-December, and then resume in about February, with MLS playoffs falling somewhere in April or May. There will be a weird transition with the mini-season being played from February 2027 to May 2027, basically a half season with, I believe, 14 matches and then playoffs. This feels maybe a little bit wrong, having grown so accustomed to enjoying summer games, but there are a couple clear benefits here. The first one is better alignment with the European transfer windows, which should encourage more transfers in terms of when clubs can negotiate and also in terms of players being incentivized to actually play here. For example, right now there are talks of MLS players going out on loan after the end of this 2025 season so they can be able to stay in form all the way through to the World Cup. Some players don't like taking up to a 4-month break if you don't make playoffs, then just getting 2 months of playing time and then being expected to perform at the highest levels with their national teams during the regular summer competitions. The second reason is that the MLS calendar currently is honestly pretty brutal. Playing for 8 months straight and then playoffs with so much travel really does take its toll. Having an extended break in the middle definitely alleviates that at least a little bit. And third, avoiding summer MLS games and generally aligning with the European calendar means that MLS games shouldn't conflict with international tournaments. For example, the World Cup, the Club World Cup, Copa America, and so forth. And we can start actually respecting international breaks. No more MLS games being played during World Cup qualifiers when many teams are missing their most important players. And fourth, lastly, playing in the summer is pretty challenging in the middle of the United States. There's the obvious example of summer heat in Texas, but there's also just so many storms in the summer in places like Texas, Missouri, Colorado, Minnesota, and so on. And rescheduling those matches is a pain in an already crammed MLS schedule. So I do understand why this decision was made. Really, the only downside is that while we avoid hot summer games, we will have to face cold winter games. The idea of an away game in Boston in the middle of winter honestly just does not sound fun. But that's what the league has voted for, so we'll have to see how that unfolds. So yeah, lots of news in the world of Quakes over this past week. Let me know what you make of all this and which games you're looking forward to this year. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.